Welcome back. It's time to sort some arrays. Let's grab this function, put it at the very end, because hopefully it will work at the very end, and start writing our code. We'll start off by first defining the function called merge sorted arrays. It's going to take the first parameter, which is the first array, then the second parameter, which is the second array. I'm going to first define some variables that we're going to use throughout the function. The first one will be a constant, which is merged array, which will be our answer. For now, it's going to be an empty array. And we might as well just make sure that we return this merged array at the end. Hopefully it all works and we can populate this with these two arrays. Now in here, I want to grab the array1 item just for reference, and this is going to be our very first array item. So this simply has the 0 item here in our first array. And then we'll do the same thing, array2 item, which is going to grab the number 4 from here. Now, the very first thing I like doing in a function is checking for some sort of an input, making sure that everything works. I'm going to spare you the time of me doing this because you should have an idea of how to check whether it's an array, whether you have two parameters. But the one input that I think is worth checking is what if we have something like this, where the second array is just an empty array. In our case, we can just return the first array because, well, it's already sorted. We're still merging the two arrays, but the other array doesn't have anything. And that's the same if this first array was just empty as well. So to avoid any extra work, let's check for those conditions so that right away we can give out the answer and make our function more efficient in those cases. So I can just do an if statement. I'll say array1 length. If that is equals to 0, so if first array is empty, just simply return the second array. And we can do the same for the other case. If array2 length is empty, then we can just return the first array. Nice and simple. But now let's get into the harder topic, which is what happens if both of these arrays are full, like they are now. Well, just to change things up, because I've been using the for loops for a while, I'll use the while loop in JavaScript. And this simply says loop through the items while a condition is met. In our case, I'm going to say while there is an array1 item, or there is an array2 item, do something. And remember, these variables are simply, for now, the first item in each one of the arrays. And by the way, if you're wondering why sometimes I use const, sometimes I use let, well, const means that once I assign this variable to this array, I can't modify it. I can't say merged array equals to 2. It's going to give me a warning because it's a constant. I can add things to the array, but I can't change this reference to the array. On the other hand, let allows me to do that. So later on, I can say array1 item equals to something new, like array1 in the index of 1. So that is why we're using this syntax. It's a new ES6 syntax in JavaScript. All right. So while we have things in the arrays, we want to first do a bit of a check. Let's say if array1 item is less than array 2 item. That is, if 0 is less than 4, we want to add to the merged array, empty array. We want to say push, and we'll push the first item in the array. So we're going to push 0. And because we've now pushed the 0 item into this array, we don't really need to worry about 0 anymore. So we can just simply say array 1 item is now going to equal array 1 at index of 1. Right? Because now we want to move to array item that's over here at index of 1, which is 3, so that we can compare 3 with 4. Now we want to increment this every time, and because we are doing a loop here, let's convert this into an index that is I, and increment it I++. And at the top over here, we can just say for the beginning that I is going to equal 1. So that way, as we loop through this, this is going to increment with I++, so that is increment by 1, so that we can go 0, 3, 4, 31. And by the way, I just noticed that I can't spell. This should be array over here. All right. Now that's the case when array 1 item is less than array 2. But let's do the other side. If array 2 item is less than array 1, we now merge into the array 2 item. Because if array 1 item is not less than array 2 item, we don't even need to add a condition here. We know that array 1 item is greater than array 2 items, in which case we can just add the second item. So that is, we add this item instead. And again, we want to do the exact same thing that we did with the first item, or the first array. That is, the array 2 item is now going to equal array 2, and we need a different index of this. We can't use the same one, right? So we can just say this is going to be j, and up here, we simply do the same thing. J is going to equal to 1. So once we figured out the 0 index items, we can then move on to index of 1, then index of 2, index of 3, so on and so forth. Now let's check this code and see if it works. If I run this, you'll see that my browser just crashed. And that's because I have a setting on REPL.IT which allows for this to happen. Most likely, if you're using the default settings here, it will give you a warning. But let's go back. Why did that happen? This is why it's always a good idea to go step by step and make sure things work. We did a lot of coding here without actually testing if any of this works. So a good note here is to pause every once in a while and just test your assumptions, log out the answers. In this case, we missed a critical point. That is in this check over here. If we do the while loop as long as array 1 item or array 2 items are populated. And we check here if array 1 item is less than array 2 item. But the problem here is that we could have a case where one of these, because we're using OR, could be undefined or we reach the end of the line. In order to account for that, the critical thing to do here is to always know how your code is running. So let's do a console.log here. Say array 1 item, and then array 2 item. Let's see what we get throughout the loop. If I run this, it's going to crash again and we won't be able to see our logs. So I'm just going to write down the correct version here and then explain why we did what we did. I'm going to just say if array 2 item, if the array2 item doesn't exist, so if we have undefined, it's going to turn this into true, so we run through this. What is that? Let's have a look. Notice what we just logged here. We've logged array1 item, then array2 item. So this is why we're comparing throughout our loops. 0 and 4, then 3 and 4, then 4 and 4, then 4 and 6, then 31 and 6, 31 and 30, and then 31 and undefined. You see here how the second array item becomes undefined. And in order for us to bypass this undefined, which becomes undefined here, and we use the exclamation mark in JavaScript to turn this into a true statement. So it turns into this so that we can add the 31 in array1 into the final slot of the array. Now, if this was like this and I run, we get undefined for the first array. However, because we're doing this second check, which is array1 item less than array2 item? And in our case, if we do undefined less than 6, which is what we're doing here in this comparison, if I run this, and let's console.log this to see what the answer is, I get false. So even though in this time around, array1 is undefined because we've gone through it, because this statement is false, we go to the else statement and fill the rest of the array with 6 and 13 or 30, which come from array2. Now, I wanted to point this out to you because this may not be the cleanest solution, right? I mean, looking at this code, just think about what I had to explain and draw out for you to fully understand how this works. And I did this for a specific reason. During the interview, if you have to explain things in detail like this and write things out, well, perhaps there's a better way of writing it. Because an interviewer is going to get confused as to what this means, then what this means, and it doesn't really read like English, does it? Ideally, these functions are really, really nice to just read. So perhaps I can take this part of the function and convert it into its own function and just name this as should push first array item. And this should be should push array2 item. And by extracting out these pieces of code into their own little function, you can clean out this answer and make it more readable. And interviewers are going to like that. Now, during an interview, you may not have time to do so, but you can let the interviewer know how you wrote the solution and you understand that this is probably not the most readable solution. And this is what you would do to clean it up. You don't have to actually code it. As long as you tell them and you understand where you would improve things, that in an interviewer's eyes is just as good as you actually coding it that way. All right, looks like this is working. If I do an empty array here, I see that it's still working. Our answer is looking good. Hope you got this far. I'll see you in the next video.